Just give a quick few updates on the contest. As always, we really appreciate everybody's submissions so far. It's been really nice to see newcomers as well as regular people, regular contributors submitting new queries. So we're always welcome on that. We're still wrapping up phase one queries, which are queries that have been published before January 1st. And so we are um, we're still approving some phase one queries left. That said, we are also reviewing all phase two. So if you submitted a query recently, likely we have reviewed that query. And I know we saw maybe a couple that still haven't been reviewed, but those came in the past day or two. So if you submitted one of those, please be on the lookout for feedback. We'll have some for you today. And so really appreciate that. Probably expect wait times to be about 1 week for responses. We're not approving phase two queries just yet, but we are still approving phase one. And so just be on the lookout for that and appreciate everybody's patience on that. I know everybody has been doing a lot of work on the queries. So just thank you for all the work you guys do. And we'll have some updates on the contest in the coming weeks. So just be on the lookout for that as well. I think we'll give maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. If you guys can't watch this, you are more than welcome to watch it on our YouTube channel, where we have all of our previous uh, Discord events recorded. So go check that out. A lot of talks on Glider, a lot of talks on various well known vulnerabilities, past exploits with a lot of top researchers. So please go take a look at that. It's provides a lot of information for you guys as security researchers. Also looking for ideas on how to write better Glider queries. I think we'll give 1 more minute before we start. And as always, for any discussion, you guys are more than welcome to ask any questions you have in the chat, and we'll be sure to answer them um, as quick as we can. And one more thing, if you guys want to find us on Discord and have any questions for us regarding Glider or anything security research related, please don't hesitate to ask. We have several different channels you guys can go check out. In particular, Glider, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. You could ping me. I'm generally will be able to answer any questions you guys have pretty quickly. So don't hesitate to reach out to us there. I think we're ready to go. Ellen, does that sound good?
Yes, let's go.
Perfect. All right, guys. Welcome to another Discord event hosted by Remedy. Today I have Ellen here and um, our lead community manager, and me, Jason. I am a glider security researcher and triager currently for the glider contest. So if you guys have submitted queries, you've probably seen me around. Today I want to actually talk about this idea that we could take glider queries and we could create related uh, glider queries based off of a single glider query. So if you've written a glider query before and you say, okay, well, I've written one, this is cool. Can I write more? You could certainly write another one from scratch, but I also think it's certainly possible to write a query and then copy it and then adjust it and to find related vulnerabilities. So this talk is really going to be focused on showing you guys how to do that because it's going to save you a lot of time. You're going to be able to catch more vulnerabilities. You're also going to learn more about how to use Glider efficiently instead of having to write queries from scratch each time, which can be helpful, but time is really important, I think, for every security researcher. So, um, as always, you guys are more than welcome to ask questions in the chat, and Ellen will be very kind to ask me the questions and try to answer it as best as I can. So, Um, don't hesitate to ask questions there. Ellen, do you have any initial questions for me
Yes,
before we get
I
started?
do. So, can you just briefly walk us through what it actually means to expand the query? Like, what's the process?
Yeah, so let's say, and obviously, I'm going to show you guys a bunch of queries in a minute or two on my screen, but on a high level, every query identifies a single vulnerability. And if we're able to think about different vulnerability classes, so just not having a glider query that focuses on one vulnerability, but thinking about instead of it targeting an entire vulnerability class, we can expand that query. We can rewrite it slightly to look for many different vulnerabilities that are related to the first vulnerability we found. So, a very common example you'll see, and it's the first one we'll show shortly, is the idea of a function being called and its value being used somewhere. Oracle prices are one of the most common types of vulnerabilities we have. And if you write a query that identifies a vulnerability, identifies a price oracle manipulation, like calling Uniswap v2's get reserves, you could easily take that query and rewrite it to identify a different uh, Oracle. So instead of Uniswap v2, we could look for Uniswap v3. We could look for Redstone, et cetera, et cetera. So that is an example of us taking a idea of a single query, expanding it, slightly rewriting what the query is looking for. Maybe we're adding a few rules, ultimately to get a new query that identifies a related but different vulnerability.
Yes, and like when you look at an existing query, what are the things you are looking for to identify an expansion opportunity?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's all based on how what your query is actually looking for.
Huh.
So in a lot of the examples you'll see, again, you'll see it shortly. We have different queries that um, they almost look identical, except for there's these minor rules that we're changing inside the query, and that's typically going to be if we're looking for a particular function, if we're trying to identify if there's a certain value being used somewhere. Maybe we are, although I generally don't, uh, I generally am against grepping. If we're grepping something, that's a huge like that's a focal point where we could think about, okay, we could take this query and we could slightly rewrite it, and then we now have a new vulnerability. We have a new query that identifies a new vulnerability,
Huh.
and we've changed very little code.
And like, uh, how do you decide which related vulnerabilities are worth targeting with a new query?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you have to have some experience with Glider to really know when to use a query or when to decide you want to rewrite a new one. I think queries that are quite complicated, and I'm talking about queries that maybe have over 100 to 200 lines of code. I think we're talking about cases where it's so complex, it's so there's so many rules to follow that I think it becomes difficult to be able to replicate that into a new query. So, what I typically like to look for are queries that are small that identify a vulnerability that I know can be sort of replicated, or we could think about it from a different angle and identify a vulnerability from using maybe a different protocol. Again, going back to that Oracle price manipulation. Oracle price manipulation occurs across many different types of oracles. It's just not Uniswap. It's just not Chainlink. So, if you think about it from the angle of keeping things small, is it looking for something that could be applicable to other types of protocols? Those are the sort of things that I like to think about when I'm debating whether or not it's worth it to try to expand this query into identifying related vulnerabilities.
Okay, I'm done with my questions for now. I know you have prepared some examples. Can you please show?
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. And Hopefully you guys could see it. Um, are you guys able to see my glider IDE?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, as I mentioned earlier, the first example I'm going to show is a Oracle price manipulation query. So, um, actually, most of the queries we see here have been submitted in the glider contest. Now, these aren't the actual queries written. This is just like a very abbreviated version of that. So, unfortunately, if you're thinking of glider contest query ideas, I think most of these are taken, unfortunately. But what I will say is this is we're going to see how we could take an existing vulnerability that does exist and tweak it such that it becomes a new vulnerability. It targets a new vulnerability. And at least certainly in the case of security research, that's really important because you want to try to identify as many vulnerabilities as you can, as quickly as you can. But also, in terms of at least the glider contest, we're able to, we're happy to accept these type of queries where you have this sort of template pattern and it's identifying different vulnerabilities across a related vulnerability class. So let's take this first example where very simply, and I'll run it. I'm not going to run, I'll try to run the query I'll try to run every query, but I don't want us to focus so much on the results and more just on the query itself, but I'll run it in the background anyways. So in this case, it's very simple what we're doing. We're just looking for get reserves functions, which is a Uniswap v2 function that returns the reserve values from a Uniswap pool. We're then just trying to figure out who's calling that get reserves. And then we're going to find the instructions for it. And then finally, after all this is done, we've identified cases where get reserves is called. We're going to check to see if it's going to flow into a instruction that is calling another function. And I'm inducing sort of some basic ideas here. First of all, I'm assuming that get reserves is going to be called and it's going to be used in some sort of price manipulation. I don't know that for sure, but this is my assumption that I'm assuming in the query. Second, I'm going to assume that this is call is important. Now, I really don't know if it is or isn't. And very good likelihood based on the single result I have here, I may need to optimize this query a little bit. But that said, I have a really great foundation for this a query that can identify this get reserves value and see where it flows to. And if anybody's really not familiar with get reserves, maybe you're new or you just haven't checked Uniswap V2, get reserves is a manipulable value. It could be it's led to a lot of vulnerabilities in the past, and although it's not really used anymore, I think most developers are very conscious of the risks using it. It's just a really good basic query that we can write to and vulnerability we could look for. So this is the basic query. It's very simple. It's you know a little bit more than 20 lines of code, 20 23 maybe, and so with this, we can now take this idea of we have these interesting lines of code here where we're looking for very specific functions. We're looking for get reserves, but then we're also checking to see if this get reserves value right here ever flows into a call. We could take this and we could say, okay, well, we have Uniswap v2. What about Uniswap v3? So what we could do, and what I've done here, is just rewrite this query. It's almost identical to the previous one, with the exception being that we've just changed these slot zeros. And we changed the functions that we're looking for from get reserves. Oh, sorry. Get reserves up here to slot zero here. And if I run the query, I think we'll find a case where we have a slot zero. It's returning the square root ratio x96, and it's used. I think it's used like right here in this function. So again, I'm just taking this single query that focuses on Uniswap v2, and I'm just shifting it from Uniswap v2 to Uniswap v3. Now, maybe I need to make some adjustments to this query. Maybe I need to make it a little bit more precise, like what type of calls are being made. That's fine. But the core of this query has not changed, except for what I'm actually looking for. Um, so if we look at this example, again, it's almost identical to the previous example, except for I'm doing two changes. The first change I'm doing is now I'm thinking about, well, what about Uniswap v3 positions? So I've just changed these values here, set it to positions. And what this will do is it's going to look for all calls to positions. And then instead of looking for cases where the values returned from the positions function flow into a call, I'm just going to check to see if it flows into a storage right. And maybe from there, I'm able to come up with a particular vulnerability, or I'm able to find a contract that has a very particular set of logic regarding positions. And like positions, the values returned from positions can also be manipulated. So now I could think about from the aspect of like, well, if they're storing these manipulated values, maybe there's something more to this. Um, so I'm just keeping everything at its core, and I'm just expanding the logic. I could probably also do this for Uniswap v4. I could think about other functions for Uniswap v3. I could take a look at different pools. I could take a look at curve, and I could probably apply the same sort of query to curve functions and think about um, how can a contract developer um, misuse or misunderstand the functions that it has available to them via curve or via uniswap, and how can they screw it up in such a way that leads to a vulnerability. So here it's just very simple. It's just flow a function call to another potential function call or storage right. And by the way, so if you guys are interested, this is all in Kovan, so you don't need any. You could run all these queries, and we'll share them in the Discord channel. We could run them all against Kovan. So these aren't actual production contracts. If anybody's trying to look for these addresses, these are all on Kovan, so they're all test contracts with no risk of exploit.
Question.
Go ahead.
I assume that there may be cases when expanding a query will make it broad and noisy. Like, how do you handle those cases?
Yeah, and in those cases, you have to really think about how much work you want to put into it. So obviously, like if it's for the glider contest, and if you submit it, if it's not greppy, if it's not grepping a lot, if it's really relying on the glider API library and you have some hits, I think we would accept that. If you're doing this for security research, that's an interesting problem. Obviously there's ways you could just filter out the false positives, which is you want to look at the most common false positive you have, which is probably some sort of code pattern that's seeping in into your results, and you just want to cut out that common pattern. Maybe you want to hardwire something up. Maybe there's like a common function name
Mm.
that for that there's a particular function that always returns a false positive, and you have the function name. You can filter it out that way. Um, I would say that noise is you're always going to have a little bit of noise. Um, and queries. And so just learning how to filter that out is probably, I would suggest, is the biggest thing. Also, you just may have a query that may not be, that may have to be rewritten,
Hmm.
and you may not be able to replicate it. I mean, not all queries can do this. So I'll just say this. One really important thing you're seeing here is all these queries I've written here are small. And I intentionally did that, one for learning purposes, but also because um, when you do this sort of replication, you want to have a small query because if you have a query that returns a lot of noise, you may want to start customizing it to handle that uh, those edge cases that you'll come across. So that's just something I kind of want to emphasize here
Mm-hmm.
is keeping all these queries small and keeping the skeleton small. This is sort of like a template, almost like a template query we could think of.
Mm-hmm. Also, we have a question in the chat.
Hmm.
Why wouldn't you run on Ethereum?
um, you know, well, I typically try to. I almost always try to use Kovan for demoing.
Hmm.
There's been some rare exceptions, but generally, if I'm going to be broadcasting live, I want to make sure that I don't expose anything. So I feel very comfortable testing Kovan because Kovan's just test network, and um,
Oh,
there's no these aren't real production contracts.
also, Harvesto Orlando says that we also gotta avoid the query just being an optimization query instead of a different query.
Yeah, that's a very interesting note because I think you could maybe see it one way. Some people could look at this and say, "Well, it's just an optimization query."
Hmm.
I would. I mean, it's not to the glider contest. It's not. I could tell you why because in the glider contest we have a very basic rule, which is it's a duplicate if two queries have more than 80% of the same true
Hits.
positive rates.
Hmm.
So, in every case I've shown, we're getting different results, completely 100% different results. There's no way that they could collide.
Hmm.
And so, uh, in this case, if you were to submit, now I'll say this, all these, I think, I don't think we had one on positions. I'm not suggesting you guys submit a positions one. Maybe there's something really interesting here that we could take from this query, but at least in terms of like slot zero and get reserves, I mean, they've been submitted. So I, I would, uh, I would not rely on these queries for new submissions, but again, they all have different results. And if they were submitted today, and there were no duplications of these would be accepted. Maybe
Acceptable.
not verbatim, but pretty
Hmm.
close to an acceptable quality.
Also, King asks how different do extended queries have to be from the original for them not to be considered as duplicates? And I think you just answered this question with the
Yeah,
80%,
it's all about the
eighty
results.
percent
Yeah,
difference in results.
yeah. Or if it's more than 80%, if it's more than 80% the same, it's going to be considered a duplicate.
Mm. And like
Okay.
another question,
Go ahead.
what mistakes do you see people make when trying to write queries from scratch and building on existing ones?
The most common is, and this is, I totally understand this is when you're new to glider, it's a lot to take in. Um, so I see a lot of AI usage that unfortunately produces some hallucinations.
Mm.
I'm pretty aware of that. I know, like internally, I'm trying to, our team is trying to figure out how to better fix that for users. So it's sometimes AI usage that just produces like
Mm.
invalid glider query functions. I think a lot of complexity. Um, don't be afraid to go look at glider query examples as well. I don't think a lot. I don't know if people do look at the the queries that exist in the database, but they have been reviewed by us and edited and I think they're good examples to work off of. And so I'm hoping maybe from this talk, you guys could take these different queries that exist already in the database and just kind of work with them and tweak it. And maybe you'll be able to find a completely different vulnerability class for the same query. Um,
Mm.
so those are sort of the common mistakes. AI, not leveraging existing database queries and
Complexity.
um, yeah, complexity and just a lot of grepping. There's a lot of grepping that happens in the first initial queries,
Mm.
and grepping's easy, man. Grepping is so easy to do. It's like it really is just an easy thing to do, and I totally get it. But it's at least in terms of for the glider contest, we ask that we try to reduce grepping as much as possible.
Okay.
Um, all right, so let's go and we're going to look at a different glider query template. If we call them templates if we want. In this case, we're just looking for a particular math operation such that the denominator in a math formula that involves division has user input. So this is actually a little bit bigger than the previous one, but we're just using some very common code that exists in the Glider cheat sheet. If you guys haven't checked it out, go to our docs. We have and type and search for Glider cheat sheet. We have some very common Glider query code available to you. And so I just copied one of them, which is the get components recursive. It allows us to get all the variables or components inside of an instruction. You'll see why that's important in a second. So here, we're just going to look for math formulas that have division. And then what we're going to do is we are going to get oh, actually, we don't use the get components recursive here. Well, you can ignore that, but that is helpful if we want to be more precise here in this query. Um, what we're going to do is we're just going to get components of the instruction, and then I'm going to iterate through it, and then I'm going to check to see if there's any division in this particular in any particular instruction. And if division does occur, I'm going to then grab the next component and then I'm going to call this really, really neat function called is tainted. And what is tainted tells us is whether or not the user who called the function has the ability to manipulate that value. It's a super helpful function for us. So we'll run it. And again, I'll be honest with you. I think one of the queries won't return results, but regardless, what we're trying to do here is just find, and this actually might return results. I don't know. We're just looking for a case where we have 1E18, or let's just say there's like balance divided by user input. So this is a really interesting math formula. I mean, division and denominators have a large impact on mathematical formulas. I mean, every variable in a mathematical formula does, but one that has division. I mean, we could do very interesting things. If you could control the denominator, you could try to set the value to 0. And we know that if you've been doing enough security research, values set at 0 often have very interesting side effects, especially if they're not accounted for. So in this case, we're just identifying this particular mathematical formula. Now, I'm sure that when we run it and we get back results, we could kind of dig deeper and uh, decide to customize this query and make it a little bit more niche, make it a little bit more focused. Because maybe we'll have questions like, well, what does that mathematical formula relate to? Is it used for something important? But we have like our core functionality here, which is just looking for math functions, checking if there's division, checking to see if there's user input in the denominator. So what if, we could take this scenario and we got back results. And so as somebody previously asked about uh, noise, obviously we see here that there's safe div, which this looks to be a like sort of a false positive. I mean, I could just take this safe div function name and just update the query to account for that. I don't know if I would suggest that as part of the glider contest. We may have to be a little bit more precise, but that's just a very common way to get rid of that noise. And then I could just add a check here that says if the instruction comes from a function named safe div, ignore it. So we're going to take this query and then we're going to write we're going to copy it, and we're doing all of the same things as before, but instead of looking for cases where the denominator has user input, in this case I'm just going to look for cases where a literal value is set, so it's a hard coded value. And that's also interesting to me because whenever you have, say, a hard coded value, well, set as your denominator, I mean, what's the numerator? What if we have some sort of tokens that are being called? what if there's different tokens used with different decimal precision? So having checks for hard coded values is also interesting to me. I think could likely lead to uh, a vulnerability of some sorts. So here we have, in this case, it's just returned a function where we have this hard coded value. Um, this could also be fat fingered, so you could actually there could actually be additional zero there, and we just don't know it, and maybe the dev added that zero and wasn't aware of it. So again, this is almost the exact same query as before, but in this case, I've just added this instead of looking for to see if that the next component is tainted or not. I mean, that's really the only thing I've done here, and I'm able to identify a class of vulnerabilities that are related, but also just not related to the previous query. So that's really nice. I mean, it's very simple for me to do that. Now, obviously, again, we may have to make this a little bit more, make it a little bit more precise. Try to understand where this formula is being used. Why is it being used? Is it something very important? We're gonna have two more. We're gonna have, I think, two more. Ooh, sorry, two more queries we're gonna show. And if I could not press back, that would be great. So in this query, it oh sorry, this is awful. I'm having a hard time with um, switching back. Okay, so this query is very simple. We're gonna look for functions called exit pool. And I think it's from exit pool is from curve, if I recall. Um, doesn't matter. What's important for us is trying to understand who the recipient is for an exit pool. So this is actually a very interesting query because we don't have any really hard expectations for what we're going to get back. And I think sometimes this is very helpful when we're doing security research is we want to write a query that maybe doesn't find a vulnerability, but finds us potential vulnerabilities. And maybe we could take it there and just optimize it or adjust it. And this is what this type of query is. We're just trying to check to see what the value passed into exit pool is. And it's very simple what we're doing. We're just grabbing functions called exit pool. We're seeing who calls it. We're getting the instructions of those caller functions, and then we're checking to see which instruction has exit pool. And then we're going to call this filter function that's just going to print out and always return true. It's going to print out the third value of exit pool, which represents a recipient. So if I run this query, it should work, and we'll get back a value. Okay, perfect. So we got back this value, this instruction that contains exit pool, and the value is Dow Treasury. So maybe in this case, this makes perfect sense. We have a valid case where uh, exit pool is um, exit pool is um, setting the recipient to Dow Treasury, but maybe there's cases where it's a controllable user input. So just having this function right here and being able to call it is very helpful for us because we could take this query and we could adjust it. Now I could say, okay, well, what other functions are available to us? Well, I know join pool is available to us, and we can uncomment this and run this query, which is the same exact query, except for I'm just changing what the function we're looking for. And I'm just trying to check to see if this address is going to be the recipient of the shares that are created when join pool is called, which it is. So again, in this sort of template, all I'm doing is taking this query, slightly changing key characteristics of it. In this case, what's the function looking for? And then running the code and just looking to see what the results I get back from Glider are. From there, I could make it more precise. Um, one other thing we could do is be able to look for um, the type of arguments that are passed to the functions. So in this case, as you can see here, I'm just looking for the third argument, but I could easily take the same query, I could copy it, and then be able to adjust the argument. I could print it out and then be able to return true. And if I run that, I'll be able to see what the fourth argument is. Perfect. So in this query, I just get back request and I'm able to um, check to see what the argument is. And maybe from there, I could figure out a way to update this query to look for arguments with the with something to do with the third argument. It's quite creative, quite flexible for security research, and also just for looking for vulnerabilities and eligible queries for the glider contest.
Nice. Do you have any advice for someone who wants to get better at writing glider queries?
Start with simple queries.
Mm-hmm.
Look at look at the existing queries in the database. There's a couple of top contenders that I think if you go to the leaderboard and look at the list, some of the top guys are pretty good. So look at their queries, very well organized. I will say I think Chase has pretty good queries. So if you want to look at Chase the Lights, um, different submissions, I think that's a really good example of what to look for. Take it apart, just comment out a bunch of code, run it, see what the results are, add a new line of code, uncomment it, run it, and see what that outputs. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
really good way to
Mm-hmm.
learn how to um, write glider queries. That would be my suggestion for sure. And
Mm-hmm.
also just the glider API documentation. It has a bunch of simple queries you could look at that look for a single thing, and you could take that and just run with it.
Do we have any other examples? Or this was the last one?
No, that was it. I think that's all I want to share. Obviously, I'll post it in the Discord
Okay.
at the end of this call, so you guys could take a look and play with it yourself. Again, all of these have ran on Kovan, so everybody has access to Kovan. You could just run it, you get back results, and you could play with it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's available to you as well.
Guys, ask questions in the comments. And meanwhile, another question from me.
Hmm.
What should someone start from if they want to practice this today after this event?
I actually take a query from
Yeah.
the examples I've shown.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably honestly the best place because those are pretty simple. They work, and you could run with it. You could kind of understand what's going on inside the query,
Mm-hmm.
and then be able to think about just in your head, like, okay, um, what other oracles exist? Well, maybe not oracles
Mm-hmm.
because everybody submitted oracle queries, but maybe maybe I want to look for something where there are two functions. One is called and the return value is passed into another function. That seems dangerous. Well, what type of vulnerabilities in the past have existed for that?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just pick a protocol that has any protocol that is used by other contracts. Look at the security checklist and say, do can any of the queries written here in this example list, can it identify the vulnerabilities that are listed in the security checklist? And if so, then just try to write
Mm-hmm.
it out. And I think you'll find it. You'll have yourself a query pretty quickly.
We have a question from King. Any vulnerability classes
Mhm.
you would say are a bit unexplored in the contest so far?
That's a great question. Um, that's a great question. I don't see, I don't see a lot of niche. So, like, obviously, I see a lot of stuff for Uniswap. I see a ton of stuff for Chainlink.
Mm,
I see less for less known vulnerability classes. So I've seen some from Layer Zero, um, but I don't. I see a lot of abstract stuff, but I don't see a lot of specific
Jason?
course
Okay.
that implement some protocol that's used somewhat rarely. Math ones, Glider, I also added that as the examples checklist.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. We've seen it C20 queries, so maybe look for
Mm-hmm.
strap that out to from a perspective. This example or talk, which is we take something and try to replicate. So I mentioned weird ERC20. There's got to be ERC 7211. Um, so I don't sometimes, but not as much as I thought I would see. The just in general ERC ERC. There's a ton of. Sometimes I do, but
Mm-hmm.
all like accepted because ERC obviously protocols and